Before we begin tonight's story, if you're finding value in these accounts, please subscribe to the channel and leave a like. It helps us continue bringing these important stories to light, and I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below. Now, let's begin. My name is David Gadberry. Before I found myself under the endless expanse of the western sky, before I put on a uniform of the Wyoming Highway Patrol in the spring of 1989, I lived a life that felt like it belonged to a different person entirely. I was a police officer in Chicago. When people ask me why I decided to leave a major metropolitan force to patrol hundreds of miles of empty highway in one of America's least populated states, they usually expect a complicated answer, but the truth was quite simple. I was exhausted. It wasn't just physical tiredness. It was a weariness that settled deep in my bones. I was fed up with the noise, the constant friction of millions of people living on top of one another, and the endless human drama that filled every single shift. I wanted deep silence. I wanted emptiness. I wanted to drive for hours and see nothing but the scenery and the sky. I wanted to hear nothing but the wind. The transfer process was smooth. Wyoming needed bodies, and I had solid experience. By April, I was living in a small apartment in Rawlins, covering the graveyard shift on Interstate 80. My beat was the stretch between Rawlins and Rock Springs, about 80 miles of high desert, wind-blasted emptiness, and more stars than I had ever seen in my life. The first few weeks were exactly what I had hoped for. Peaceful, the occasional speeder, the rare trucker with equipment violations, but mostly just driving, watching, and thinking. The isolation was medicine for my soul. My sergeant, a weathered man named Tom Holloway, seemed amused by my enthusiasm. He told me to wait until winter, until the snows came, but I didn't mind the idea of winter. I didn't mind anything about Wyoming. I felt like I could finally breathe. I had come here to be alone, to escape the heaviness of the city. And for a while, the highway gave me exactly that. It gave me the silence I craved. But I was about to learn that there are different kinds of silence. There's the silence of peace, and then there's the silence of waiting. I had asked for emptiness, but I didn't realize that the emptiness might be looking back at me. My patrol usually started at 11 p.m. The routine was always the same. Fill the thermos with coffee, check the radar gun, and log the mileage. The night of May 17th was clear and cold, the temperature hovering around 40 degrees. Interstate 80 stretched out before me like a black ribbon. The headlights of the occasional truck, the only brakes in the darkness. By 2 a.m., the road was quiet. I pulled into the rest area at Wamsutter to fill out some reports. That's when I first heard it on the CB radio. I kept the radio in my patrol car, tuned to channel 19, the main frequency for truckers. Usually it was just chatter about traffic or weather. But tonight, around 3:15 a.m., a voice cut through the static. Breaker, breaker, any westbound traffic past Rock Springs? You got your ears on. The voice was urgent, stressed. It didn't sound like the usual casual trucker drawl. This is Smokey J, westbound at mile marker 130. Go ahead, driver. Another voice responded. Smokey, this is Dakota running with a reefer load. What's your location? Coming up on Wamsutter. Why? A pause followed, heavy and strange. Then the first voice asked, what time do you have? 3:17 a.m. What's going on? Smokey, you need to find a place to park right now. Before 3:33. Just trust me. Get off the highway, park it, and wait it out. I sat up straighter in my seat. This was unusual. I grabbed my own microphone. This is Wyoming Highway Patrol. Is there a road hazard I should know about? Dead silence on the channel. Then Smokey's voice came back, quieter. Officer, where are you at right now? Wamsutter rest area. Good. Stay there. Don't get back on I-80 until after 4:44. Do you hear me? Do not get back on the highway. Sir, I need you to explain what is happening, I said. Can't explain what you wouldn't believe. Officer, Just trust an old hand. Stay put. Then the channel went completely quiet. Just static. I checked my watch. 3:19 a.m. I should have listened. I should have stayed at that rest area. But I was a cop, and cops investigate. I finished my coffee, started my engine, and pulled back onto the highway, heading west. The road was empty, which wasn't unusual, but the emptiness felt different somehow, more complete. I passed mile marker 140, then 145. I looked to my right toward the south. Rock Springs should have been visible from here, a glow on the horizon, but there was nothing, just darkness. I grabbed my radio. Dispatch, this is Unit 7. Can you confirm the status of Rock Springs? Static. Then a distorted voice broke through. Out. Get out. It's starting. I checked my watch. 3:32 a.m. And then everything changed. It wasn't gradual. It was instant, like someone flipping a switch. 1 second, I was driving on a normal highway. The next second, I was driving through something else. The pavement was the same, but the fences, the power lines, the distant buildings, they were all gone. And the sky was wrong. The stars were too bright, arranged in patterns I didn't recognize. The darkness wasn't just an absence of light. It was a presence. I was completely alone on a highway that led through absolute nothing. The deep silence I wanted had finally found me. But it wasn't peaceful. It was terrifying. The transition was not a fading or a blurring of the edges of reality. It was an instantaneous shift, as sudden and definitive as a slammed door. One moment, I was a highway patrol officer driving through the familiar landscape of Wyoming. The next, the landscape was gone. The highway remained, the solid, reassuring asphalt beneath my tires, the painted white and yellow lines stretching into the cone of my headlights. But everything else that made it a human road had vanished. The wire fences that ran alongside the interstate, designed to keep wildlife from wandering into traffic, were gone. The occasional ranch buildings that dotted the distant horizon, their single lights of comfort in the dark, were gone. The massive power lines that paralleled the highway, their skeletal frames a testament to modern engineering, were also gone. I was driving through a version of the world that had been wiped clean of human presence. And the sky was the most unsettling part. It was still night, still profoundly dark, but the stars were all wrong. There were too many, too bright, clustered in unfamiliar patterns and constellations that I had never seen in any textbook. The darkness itself felt different. It was not merely the absence of light. It felt like a presence, a heavy blanket that absorbed sound and hope. The air in the car felt colder, thinner. A primal part of my brain, a part that had lain dormant through all my years of training, was screaming that I was in a place where I did not belong. I slowed the patrol car, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. My police radio, my link to dispatch and the world I knew, was dead. It emitted only a soft hiss of static. I tried the CB, flicking through the channels. Nothing but static there either. I was utterly and completely alone, driving on a highway that led from nowhere to nowhere. It was an island of pavement in an ocean of impossible darkness. Then I saw the headlights. In my rearview mirror, a pair of lights appeared, cutting through the oppressive dark. At first, I felt a surge of relief. Another person, another vehicle. I was not alone, but the relief was short-lived. The lights were approaching fast, closing the distance with an unnerving speed. I watched them grow in the mirror, try and make out the details of the vehicle, but something about it felt wrong. The headlights seemed too far apart, or perhaps too close together. The height was off. It moved with a smoothness that was not quite right, almost like it was gliding rather than rolling over pavement. As it drew closer, I realized it wasn't slowing down. It was maintaining its speed, coming right at me. I was trained to handle high-speed pursuits, but this was not a pursuit. This felt like something else, something predatory. I pressed down on the accelerator, My own engine roaring to life in a profound silence. The speedometer climbed, 70, 80, then 90 miles per hour. The thing behind me matched my speed exactly, maintaining the same distance, a phantom in my mirror. It was toying with me. Out of pure, desperate instinct, I grabbed my CB microphone again, holding down the button. "Anyone," I said, my voice strained. "If you can hear me, I need help. I am on Interstate 80 westbound. Something is wrong. Something is following me." For a moment, there was only static. Then a voice crackled through, clear as day despite the dead air moments before. It was a voice I recognized. "Officer, this is Smokey J. Listen to me very carefully. Do not stop. Whatever you do, do not let it catch you. Keep your speed steady and watch for the next rest area." The relief of hearing his voice was so overwhelming that I almost lost control of the car. "What the hell is this? What is happening?" I shouted into the microphone. "You're in the empty," he said, his tone grim and steady. "The third shift. It happens every night, from 3:33 to 4:44. You've got..." The radio cut out with a burst of static, then returned. "Minutes to find shelter or get back out." "Get back out? How?" My mind was racing, trying to process the impossible information. The third shift, the empty, these were not terms I had ever heard in my training. This was a language of folklore, of ghost stories told around a campfire. But the headlights in my mirror were very real. Rest areas. Smokey's voice said, "A beacon of guidance in the chaos. They're still there in the empty. You need to get to one, park, and wait it out. The shift ends at 4:44 exactly. The world comes back then. But if you are still on the highway when it happens, if you're caught out in the open, you might not make it back with it." The thing behind me was getting closer. I could see its shape more clearly now in my rearview mirror, and I wished I couldn't. It looked like a semi-truck, but the proportions were all wrong. The cab was too tall and narrow, like it had been stretched. The trailer was too long, and it seemed to move in a way that defied physics, swaying and undulating as if it were breathing. It was a distortion of familiar shape, a nightmare version of a common sight on this highway. "How far to the next rest area?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "Mile marker 165. Smokey replied instantly. "You're at 152 now. 13 miles. You can make it. Just drive." I floored it. The patrol car's powerful engine roared in protest, and the speedometer needle climbed past 100. The whole car began to vibrate, a physical manifestation of the strain. The thing behind me accelerated too, effortlessly keeping pace. It was a relentless presence, a shadow that clung to me. Mile marker 155. The thing was maybe 50 yards back now. It was close enough that I could see it wasn't a truck at all. It was something shaped like a truck, but the details were fundamentally wrong. The windows of the cab were too dark, reflecting no light. Or perhaps there were no windows at all, just black, empty spaces. The exhaust stacks seemed to move, bending in ways that solid metal should not bend. The experience was a profound assault on my senses, my brain struggling to make sense of something that should not exist. The journey was no longer about law enforcement. It was about survival. I was a traveler in a land of profound change, and I was being pursued by one of its inhabitants. My only hope was to reach the sanctuary that Smokey had promised. The miles stretched on, each one an eternity. The journey through the empty was a trial of endurance. With every passing mile, the tension in the car grew thicker. My world had shrunk to the dashboard in front of me, the speedometer needle quivering past 100, and a distorted image in my rear-view mirror. The entity behind me was a constant, unnerving presence. It was not just following, it was observing, its intentions a complete and terrifying mystery. Mile marker 160. I said into the CB mic, my voice hoarse. My engine was screaming, a high-pitched whine that sounded like it could tear itself apart at any moment. The patrol car, a machine of steel and precision, felt fragile against the vast, unnatural backdrop of the empty. Almost there, officer. Smokey's voice came back, a lifeline of calm in the storm. When you see the rest area, don't slow down until you are off the exit ramp. Get into a parking spot and kill your engine and your lights immediately. Don't give them anything to look at. What is that thing? I asked, needing to put a name to the formless dread that was consuming me. There was a pause. Something that lives in the empty, he said, his voice heavy. Something that uses the highway, just like us. Don't think about it too hard. It won't help. Just drive. Mile marker 163. Through the darkness ahead, I saw it, a familiar green and white sign, its letters reflecting in my headlights. It was a sign for the rest area at mile marker 165. I had never felt such a profound sense of relief in my entire life. It was a symbol of normalcy, a piece of the world I knew, somehow existing here in this place of unreality. It was a beacon of hope. Mile marker 164. The thing behind me was so close now that I could see it in sickening detail, and what I saw made my mind rebel against itself. It had wheels, but they weren't spinning. They seemed to be rotating through each other, occupying the same space at the same time, an impossible illusion of motion. The front grille had a shape that might have been a face, or might have been a suggestion of a face, or it might have just been my brain desperately trying to find a pattern in the chaos. It was a sculpture of wrongness, and it was almost upon me. Mile marker 165, the rest area exit. I yanked the steering wheel, taking the off-ramp at 90 miles per hour. The car fishtailed wildly, tires screaming in protest as I fought to maintain control. Behind me, the thing followed, but it seemed to struggle with the sharp turn. The wrongness of its shape made it awkward, its impossible movements less suited for the tight curve. That moment of awkwardness gave me the advantage I needed. I saw the parking lot ahead, empty and waiting. I picked a spot at random and slammed on the brakes. The car skidded into the space, the smell of burning rubber filling the air. With hands that were shaking so badly I could barely manage a simple task, I turned the key, killing the engine. I plunged the car into darkness, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. I looked up. The thing that looked like a truck pulled up to the entrance of the rest area and stopped. It just stopped, idling there on the edge of the sanctuary, its non-spinning wheels and its breathing frame a silent, menacing watch. It was waiting. I sat in my dark patrol car, hidden in the shadows of the parking lot, and tried to control my breathing. I glanced at my watch. The digital display glowed. 3:47 a.m. 57 minutes left. 57 minutes to sit here in the dark, with that thing watching from the entrance. The CB crackled to life. It was Smokey. You made it. Good. Now listen to me. Don't get out of your car. Don't turn on your lights. Don't make any noise. They can't get you in the rest areas, but they can wait. Just sit tight until 4:44. I could see other vehicles now, parked in the darkness around me. A couple of semi-trucks, an old station wagon, a camper van. All were dark, all silent. I was not the only one. These were the others who knew, the other members of this strange, secret club, all of us waiting out the shift together in our small metal boxes. How many are there? I whispered into the mic, looking at the solitary figure at the entrance. In the empty? Hard to say, Smokey replied. Some of us have seen dozens, others just one or two. They're not all the same, either. Some look like trucks. Some look like cars. Some look like other things. A cold shudder ran through me. Jesus Christ. He doesn't have much pull in the empty, officer, Smokey said, his voice devoid of humor. Trust me on that. So I sat there, in the darkness. I watched the thing at the entrance, and it watched the rest area. The minutes crawled by, each one feeling like an hour. My watch seemed to be moving in slow motion. 3:52, 3:58, 4:03. The journey had been one of extreme tension, but this waiting was a different kind of challenge. It was a test of psychological endurance. The silence was absolute, broken only by the sound of my own ragged breathing and the occasional, reassuring crackle from the CB radio, a reminder that I was not entirely alone in my vigil. This was the true nature of the silence I had sought, not a peaceful emptiness, but a space filled with unspoken rules and unseen dangers, a place where survival depended not on action, but on stillness. The transition was not a physical impact, but a shift in the very nature of the world around me. The highway remained, the asphalt solid and real beneath my tires, but the context in which it existed had dissolved. I was no longer driving through the high desert of Wyoming. I was moving through a space where the horizon had been erased, replaced by a darkness that felt infinite and heavy. It was a darkness that did not merely hide the landscape. It seemed to replace it entirely. The familiar landmarks, the distant ranch fences, the silhouettes of scrub brush, the comforting glow of the town I knew was just over the ridge, were gone. My hands tightened on the steering wheel, not out of aggression, but out of profound need to hold on to something tangible. The leather of the wheel, the hum of the engine, the glow of the dashboard dials. These were the only anchors I had left. I checked the radio again, hoping for the reassuring voice of a dispatcher or even the casual chatter of a late-night trucker. But there was only the hiss of static, a white noise that sounded like wind blowing through empty canyons. Then I saw them. In my rearview mirror, 2 points of light appeared. They were distant at first, twin stars in the obsidian void behind me. My first instinct was relief. A car, another traveler, someone else sharing this strange, dislocated road. But as the lights drew closer, that relief began to curdle into unease. The approach was too smooth. On a normal highway, headlights bounce slightly. They dip and rise with the imperfections of the road. These lights remain perfectly level, sliding forward with fluid, gliding motion that felt unnatural. As the vehicle closed the distance, the unease deepened into a quiet, cold realization. The proportions were wrong. It had the general shape of a semi-truck, the tall silhouette of a cab, and the long shadow of a trailer. But the geometry was fluid. The cab seemed too tall, stretching upward in a way that defied aerodynamic logic. The headlights were set too wide apart, like eyes that had drifted to the temples of a face. It was moving fast, gaining on me with a silent, inexorable momentum. I remembered the warning from the radio. Do not let it catch you. I pressed down on the accelerator. The engine of my patrol car responded, the speedometer climbing steadily. I was not fleeing a panic. I was moving with purpose, guided by an instinct I didn't know I possessed. I needed to maintain distance. I needed to find sanctuary, but the shadow behind me matched my pace. It did not lurch or roar. It simply occupied the space behind me, a constant, silent presence. It was then that the radio crackled to life again. The voice cut through the static, clear and calm, a lifeline thrown across a great distance. Officer, this is Smokey J. Listen to me very carefully. Keep your speed steady. Watch for the next rest area. What is happening? I asked, my voice sounding small in the quiet cabin. What is following me? You are in the empty, Smokey replied, his tone gentle but firm. It happens every night. You have entered a space that overlaps with ours, but does not follow our rules. That vehicle behind you, it is not a truck. It is something else using the form of a truck. Do not stop. Do not let it merge with your space. I looked in the mirror again. The vehicle was closer now, illuminated by the red glow of my taillights. The details that should have been there, the grille, the license plate, the rivets on the metal, were absent or blurred. The trailer behind the cab seemed to undulate, breathing like a living thing rather than a rigid box of steel. The wheels did not seem to spin so much as rotate through themselves, occupying the same space in a way that made my mind struggle to comprehend what it was seeing. It was a mimicry, a sketch of a truck drawn by something that had never seen one, only dreamed of it. How far? I asked the radio. How far to safety? Mile marker 165. Smokey said, "You are at 152. 13 miles. You can make it. Just drive. Focus on the road. Do not look in the mirror more than you have to. 13 miles. In the normal world, that is a matter of minutes. But here, in this elongated silence, it felt like a journey across an ocean. I focused on the white lines flashing past. They were my tether. I forced myself to breathe rhythmically, in and out, keeping my heart rate manageable. The fear was there, a cold knot in my stomach. But beneath it was a strange clarity. I was navigating a new reality, learning its rules in real time. The thing behind me drew closer still. I could feel a pressure in the air, the sense of being observed by something vast and ancient. It wasn't hostility. Exactly. It felt more like curiosity, the way a deep-sea creature might approach a submersible, drawn to the light and the movement. But I knew with absolute certainty that I could not allow it to touch me. I could not allow our realities to intersect. Almost there, officer. Smokey's voice came again, soothing and steady. When you see the rest area, do not slow down until you are on the ramp. Get into a parking spot and turn off your engine immediately. Become still. What is it? I whispered, unable to help myself. What does it want? It is a traveler, just like you, Smokey said. But it travels on a different frequency. Don't think about it too hard. The mind tries to make sense of things it cannot hold. Just drive. I saw the green sign ahead, illuminated by my high beams. Rest area 1 mile. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. The font, the reflective paint, the mundane instructions. They were artifacts of the human world, beacons of logic in a sea of surrealism. I signaled, a habit that seemed absurd in the emptiness, and prepared to exit. The shadow behind me was right on my bumper now. I could see the texture of its surface in the mirror, not metal, but something matte and shifting, like oil on water. It did not slow down. It did not acknowledge the exit. I took the ramp, the tires humming as I decelerated. The centrifugal force pulled gently at the car, a reminder of physics, of gravity, of the laws I understood. I swung into the parking lot. It was a wide, paved expanse, lined with the dark shapes of other vehicles. I chose a spot at random, pulling in between 2 silent semi-trucks. I put the car in park. I turned the key. The engine died. The lights died. Silence returned, absolute and heavy. I sat there, gripping the wheel, watching the entrance ramp in my rearview mirror. The entity that had followed me did not turn. It did not slow. It simply continued on the highway, gliding past the rest area with that impossible, smooth motion. For a brief second, as it passed under the halo of the rest area lights, I saw it clearly, and what I saw confirmed everything Smokey had said. It was not a machine. It was a shape, a memory of a vehicle, drifting through the dark on a current I could not feel. It moved west, fading into the deep night, leaving me sitting in the quiet, my heart slowly finding its rhythm again. I was safe. I had reached the sanctuary. But I knew, as I sat there in the cooling car, that the night was far from over. I had crossed the threshold, and the world I knew was waiting on the other side of the clock that seemed to have stopped ticking. The Wamsutter rest area was a place I had visited 100 times before. In the daylight, or even on a normal night, it was a mundane facility, a building of brick and glass, vending machines that hummed with fluorescent light, and the smell of diesel and dry grass. But in the empty, during the third shift, it was transformed into something sacred. It was a cathedral of stillness. I sat in my patrol car, the engine cooling with faint ticking sounds that seemed loud in the unnatural quiet. My hands were still resting on the steering wheel, and I made a conscious effort to unclench them, finger by finger. I took a deep breath, holding the cold air in my lungs, trying to center myself. Around me, the parking lot was occupied. This surprised me. When I had pulled in, my focus had been entirely on the escape, on the shadow that had been following me. Now, With the immediate tension fading, I looked around with fresh eyes. There were other vehicles here. To my left was a massive semi-truck, its cab dark, its curtains drawn tight. To my right was an older station wagon, laden with luggage on the roof rack. Across the lane, a camper van sat motionless. They were all dark, no interior lights, no idling engines, no movement. It was a silent congregation of travelers who, like me, had found themselves in the time between times. I wondered about the people inside those vehicles. Were they asleep? Were they huddled in their seats, watching the darkness just as I was? Or were they seasoned veterans of this shift, calmly reading a book by flashlight, waiting for the world to realign? I checked my watch. 3:47 a.m. 57 minutes remained until the shift ended. 57 minutes until 4:44 a.m. I reached for the radio handset, my movement slow and deliberate. "Smokey," I whispered into the mic. "I'm parked. I'm safe." The response was immediate, warm, and reassuring. "Good. You did well, David. Now listen. This is the hard part. The waiting. Why are there others?" I asked, looking at the silent trucks. "Does everyone know?" "More than you think," Smokey replied. "Most of the long haulers know. We plan our routes around it. If you can't avoid Interstate 80 during these hours, you find a rest area and you park. It's the unwritten rule of the road, the sanctuary. The things out there, the shadows, they can't come in here. Or maybe they just choose not to. The rest areas are like islands, solid ground in a shifting sea. And the cars," I asked, looking at the station wagon. "The families? Some know. Some just got lucky. Maybe they felt tired, pulled over to sleep, and they'll never know that the world changed while they were dreaming. They'll wake up at 5, start their engines, and drive on, thinking they just had a nap. Ignorance can be a shield sometimes." I leaned back in my seat, the leather creaking softly. I watched the entrance of the rest area. The highway beyond was visible as a dark river. Occasionally, a shape would pass by. Sometimes it looked like a car, sometimes like a truck, and sometimes it was just a blur of motion that the eye couldn't quite track. They moved without sound, drifting from east to west to east. Travelers on a journey I couldn't comprehend. The atmosphere in the rest area was profound. It wasn't fearful. It felt communal. There was a sense of shared endurance. We were all paused, suspended in a bubble of safety, while the storm passed silently outside. It reminded me of waiting out a blizzard in a mountain pass, where strangers become temporary neighbors, bound together by the elements. As the minutes ticked by, slowly, so slowly, I found my mind wandering. I thought about Chicago, the noise of the precinct, the shouting, the sirens. It seemed like a lifetime ago. It seemed like a different reality entirely. Here in the high desert silence, that chaos felt trivial. I was touching the edge of a mystery that made human conflict seem small. "Smokey," I said into the radio, keeping my voice low, "how long has this been happening?" "As long as I've been driving," Smokey said. "Since '71. The old-timers say it goes back further. Maybe it started when they built the interstate, cutting through the land. Maybe it was always here, and the road just made it easier to see. We don't ask why anymore, David. We just learn the schedule. 3:58 a.m., 4:15 a.m., 4:30 a.m. Time behaved strangely in the sanctuary. Minutes stretched, then compressed. I found myself observing the stars again. They were still wrong. Constellations I didn't know, burning with a light that was too blue, too intense. But looking at them from the safety of the parked car, they didn't feel as threatening. They felt indifferent. We were the intruders here, witnessing a sky that wasn't meant for our eyes. At 4:40 a.m., I sensed a change. It was subtle at first, a shift in the air pressure, a feeling of static electricity discharging. The other vehicles seemed to become more solid. The outlines of the rest area building sharpened. "Get ready," Smokey said. "Almost time." The transition is quick. Don't be startled. I watched the clock on the dashboard. 4:43 a.m. The seconds ticked away. And then it happened. It was exactly as it had been when I entered, but in reverse. There was no flash of light, no sound, just a sudden, instantaneous return to context. One moment. I was sitting in a void, surrounded by silence and strange stars. The next, the hum of the transformer on the light pole was audible. The distant sound of a real truck, a diesel engine grinding up a gear on the highway, drifted through the window. The sky softened, the alien constellations fading as the true stars of the Milky Way returned to their familiar places. The faint, gray hint of pre-dawn light touched the eastern horizon. The world had snapped back into place. I let out a breath I felt I had been holding for an hour. I opened the car door and stepped out. The air was cold, smelling of sagebrush and damp earth. The smell of the real world. I walked over to the edge of the parking lot and looked out at the highway. It was just a road again. Asphalt, paint, dirt. A driver in the semi-truck next to me opened his door. He was an older man, wearing a flannel shirt and a baseball cap. He climbed down, stretched his back, and looked at me. He didn't say a word. He just nodded, a slow, solemn dip of his chin. It was an acknowledgement. We made it. We are back. I returned the nod. I got back into my car. The seat still warm. I picked up the radio mic one last time. "Smokey, I'm here, David. Welcome back." "I'm back," I said. "I'm clear. Get some rest? Son, you survived your first shift. It gets easier, or at least you get used to it." I started the engine. The sound was loud, mechanical, and wonderfully ordinary. I pulled out of the rest area and merged onto Interstate 80, heading west toward Rock Springs. The lights of the city were visible now, a warm, golden glow on the horizon. The sun was beginning to rise behind me, painting the desert in shades of pink and gold. I drove toward the light, carrying the seeker of the darkness with me. I was a highway patrolman, a guardian of the road. But I knew now that the road was not just a strip of pavement. It was a bridge over deep water. And for 71 minutes every night, the bridge disappeared. I had survived the third shift. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my chest, that I would be back. The empty was waiting, and now I was part of its story. The morning sun over the high desert of Wyoming is a revelation. After hours of darkness, the light doesn't just return. It floods the landscape, revealing the stark, rugged beauty of the sandstone cliffs and the endless rolling sagebrush. I drove back to Rawlins that morning bathed in that golden light, the heater in my patrol car humming softly. The world felt solid again. The fences were where they belonged, running parallel to the asphalt. The power lines dipped and rose in their familiar rhythm. But I was not the same. I felt like a diver who had surfaced too quickly, my mind still pressurized by the depths I had visited. I filed my report at the station, my pen hovering over the paper as I described the events of the night. I wrote about the traffic stops, the mileage, the weather conditions. I left out everything that had happened between 3:33 a.m. and 4:44 a.m. How could I describe the indescribable? How could I explain a highway that led to nowhere, or the shadow that had followed me? It would sound like madness, or worse, incompetence. So I kept the secret. I showered, washing the scent of cold fear from my skin, and tried to sleep. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw the impossible wheels of that vehicle rotating through themselves in a way that physics did not allow. I had a choice to make. I could request a schedule change. I could ask to be moved to the day's shift, where the sun banished all shadows and the world made sense. I could transfer to a different route, maybe even a different state. I could walk away, but there was a pull I couldn't ignore. Curiosity is a powerful force, but this was more than curiosity. It was a sense of unfinished business. I had been invited into a hidden world, and to turn my back on it felt like a betrayal of my own nature. That night, before my next shift began, I drove out to a truck stop just outside of Rawlins. It was a place of neon signs and the heavy rumble of idling engines, an island of light in the growing dusk. I walked into the diner, the smell of coffee and frying bacon hitting me like a physical wave. I scanned the booths, looking for a face I had never seen but felt I would recognize. And there he was. He was sitting at the counter, a ceramic mug cradled in his hands. He was an older man, his face etched with the kind of lines that only come from years of staring at the horizon. He had a gray beard neatly trimmed and eyes that were alert and kind. He wore a flannel shirt and a vest that had seen better days. As I approached, he turned on his stool and looked at me. He didn't look surprised. "Figured you would show up," he said. His voice was the same one I'd heard on the radio, calm, gravelly, reassuring. "Got questions?" "About 1,000, I said, taking the stool next to him. "Then sit down," he said, signaling the waitress for another cup. "We have time before the third shift starts. Let me tell you everything I know about the empty." For the next 2 hours, I sat in that diner and listened. The man introduced himself as Earl, but everyone on the road called him Smokey. He was a veteran of Interstate 80, a man who had been driving this route since the early 70s. He spoke softly, his words measured and precise, as if he were passing down an oral history. "You have to understand, David," he said, stirring his coffee. "The empty isn't evil. It's not malicious. It's just incompatible. It's a place that exists alongside ours, and sometimes the barriers get thin. The highway is the seam. When we drive at the right time, we slip through the stitches." He told me about the rules. The most important one was the schedule. 3:33 a.m. to 4:44 a.m. 71 minutes where reality held its breath. He explained the geography of the void, that while the road looked the same, the distances were different. A mile in the empty could take an hour to drive, or a second. "You are one of us now," Smokey said, looking me in the eye. "You have seen it. You have felt the shift. You can't unsee it. You can run from it. Sure, but you'll always know it's there, waiting." I realized then that this wasn't just a mentorship. It was an induction. I was joining a fraternity of night watchmen, a loose network of truckers and patrol officers who guarded the secret of the highway. Smokey wasn't just teaching me how to survive. He was teaching me how to live with the knowledge of the unknown. "Why do we do it?" I asked. "Why you keep driving it?" Smokey smiled a sad, knowing expression. "Because someone has to. There are people out there, tourists, families, kids, who stumble into it. They don't know the rules. They get scared. If we aren't there to guide them to the rest areas, to warn them on the radio, who will?" It was a profound moment of clarity. My job as a police officer was to protect and serve. I had thought that meant enforcing speed limits and helping with flat tires. But Smokey was offering me a higher calling. I could be a guardian in the truest sense, protecting the innocent from a danger they couldn't even comprehend. "I'm staying," I said. "I'm not transferring." Smokey nodded, satisfied. "Good. Then you need to learn. Tonight, we start your education." We left the diner and walked out into the cool night air. The stars were beginning to emerge, the familiar constellations of the northern hemisphere. But as I looked up at them, I knew that in a few hours, they would be replaced by the strange, bright patterns of the empty. And for the first time, I didn't feel fear. I felt prepared. I had a guide. I had a purpose. The highway was waiting, and I was ready to meet it. The education of a night patrolman on Interstate 80 is not found in any manual. It is not taught at the academy, and it is not written in the standard operating procedures of the highway patrol. It is learned in the cab of a truck, over crackling radios, and in the quiet, dark corners of rest areas. Over the next week, Smokey became my professor, and the high desert night became my classroom. Before each shift, we would meet, sometimes at the truck stop, sometimes parked side by side on a quiet shoulder of the road before the sun went down. Smokey carried a small, battered notebook, its pages filled with neat handwriting, sketches, and maps. It was a chronicle of the impossible, a survivor's guide to a world that shouldn't exist. "This is the most important thing," Smokey said one evening, tapping a hand-drawn map with a callous finger. "Know your safe spots. In the empty, a rest area is more than a parking lot. It is sanctuary. It is neutral ground. The things that live in the shift, the echoes, the shadows, they don't enter the rest areas. We don't know why. Maybe the concentration of human consciousness pushes them back. Maybe it's just the light. But if you are in trouble, if you're being followed, you get to a rest area." He made me memorize them. Wamsutter, Bitter Creek, Point of Rocks. I learned the mile markers by heart, reciting them like a mantra. Mile marker 165. Mile marker 130. I learned to calculate distances not in miles, but in time, constantly checking my watch against the creeping arrival of 3:33 a.m. Smokey also taught me to read the signs. The shift didn't always happen without warning. There were precursors, subtle tremors in the fabric of reality that a trained eye could spot. "Watch the static," he told me. "Before the shift, the radio interference changes. It stops sounding like random noise and starts sounding rhythmic, like breathing. If you hear the breathing static, get off the road. It means a barrier is thin tonight." He taught me about the hot zones. There were stretches of the highway where the empty was more intense, where the overlap between worlds was deeper. Mile marker 133 was one such place. "Don't stop at 133, Smokey warned, his face serious. "Even if you see someone stranded, even if you see a crash, you radio it in, you mark it, but you do not stop your vehicle. That stretch, it's hungry. Things happen there that don't happen anywhere else." "What kind of things?" I asked. He hesitated, then pulled a photograph from the back of his notebook. It was old, faded, the colors shifting toward sepia. It showed a semi-truck parked on the shoulder of the road, but the truck looked wrong. The cab was stretched vertically, as if it had been pulled like taffy. The trailer was bent in a curve that metal shouldn't be able to achieve. "This was Jimmy Henderson," Smokey said quietly. "Good driver. 20 years on the road. One night in '83, he had a breakdown at mile marker 133. He didn't make it to a rest area. We found his rig the next morning looking like this." "And Jimmy?" I asked, a cold feeling settling in my stomach. He was inside, still gripping the wheel. He was changed. His mind was gone. He couldn't speak, couldn't move. He just stared at nothing. The doctor said it was a stroke, a massive neurological event. But we knew he had spent too long in the deep empty, without protection. The physics of that place, they don't just bend metal, they bend minds. I stare at the photo, the image of the distorted truck burning into my memory. It was a stark reminder of the stakes. This wasn't a game. It wasn't a ghost story. It was a physical danger with real consequences. "That is why we have the network," Smokey said, taking the photo back. "We look out for each other. We share information. We survive together." I learned about the other members of this invisible fraternity. There was Rabbit, a trucker known for his speed and his willingness to help anyone in trouble. There was a patrol officer from Utah named Jen, who monitored the western edge of the corridor. There was even a geologist, Dr. Webb, who was trying to understand the scientific basis of the anomaly. They were just voices on the radio to me at first, handles and call signs, but they became my lifeline. Every night, as the clock ticked toward 3:33 a.m., the radio would come alive. It was a roll call of the damned and the determined. Unit 7, holding at Wamsutter. I would say, "Smokey J, parked at Point of Rocks." The reply would come, "Rabbit, eastbound, trying to beat the clock to Rawlins." It was a comfort to hear those voices. It meant I wasn't alone in the dark. We were a chain of lighthouses, beaming our signals across a dark ocean. Try and keep the ships off the rocks. Smokey taught me one final lesson that week, perhaps the hardest one to accept. "You can't save everyone, David," he said. Sometimes you will see things on the road, cars that don't belong, people who look lost. But you have to know the difference between a stranded traveler and a lure. The empty, it learns, it mimics, it knows we want help, and it uses that against us. He told me about the mimics, entities that took the shape of broken down cars or police vehicles or even crying children. They were traps designed to make you stop, to make you open your door, to make you step out of your protected space and into theirs. Trust your gut, Smokey said. If something feels wrong, it is wrong. If the shadows look too deep, if the distress call sounds too perfect, drive on. It's the hardest thing you'll ever do, leaving someone behind. But if you stop for a mimic, you don't just lose your life. You become part of the trap. By the time I started my shift at 11 p.m. that Friday, I felt different. I wasn't just a rookie cop anymore. I was an initiate. I carried the map of the void in my head. I knew the safe harbors. I knew the dangers. And most importantly, I knew I wasn't fighting this battle alone. The empty was waiting, as it always did, vast and silent and strange. But I was ready. I turned my patrol car onto the on-ramp, the headlights cutting a path through the night, and for the first time, I drove toward the darkness not with fear, but with respect. I was a guardian of the third shift, and I had work to do. The world of the highway patrol is usually one of clear lines and distinct jurisdictions. You have your beat, your fellow officers, and the chain of command. But the world I had entered, the world of the third shift, operated on a different kind of logic. It was bound not by badges or borders, but by shared knowledge and mutual survival. We were a secret society without a name, a collection of solitary travelers connected by radio waves and the heavy burden of the truth. I learned that this network was far more extensive than I had initially imagined. It wasn't just Smokey and me. It was an invisible web stretched tight across the high desert, vibrating with information in the deep hours of the night. The hub of this communication was CB Channel 19, but only during the critical window between 3:33 a.m. and 4:44 a.m. During the daylight hours or even the early evening, Channel 19 was just the usual chaotic mix of voices. Truckers complaining about way stations, tourists asking for directions, the static-filled hum of commerce moving west. But when the clock struck 3:33, the channel changed. It cleared. The casual chatter vanished, replaced by a disciplined, quiet urgency. It became a lifeline. You can talk to people in the empty even if you're not in it. Smokey had explained to me during one of our diner sessions. If you are parked safely at a rest area, your radio still picks up the signal. It pierces the veil. You can hear the drivers who are stuck out there, the ones trying to make it to safety. Sometimes you can guide them. Sometimes you just have to keep them company. My second week on the shift brought this reality home with striking clarity. I had taken Smokey's lessons to heart. I made sure to be parked at the Wamsutter rest area well before the shift began. I sat in my patrol car, the engine off, the heater ticking as it cooled. Outside, the wind whipped around the corners of the building, but inside the car it was still. At exactly 3:33 a.m., the world shifted. The lights of the rest area dimmed, taking on that strange, bluish quality that I was beginning to recognize. The silence descended like a heavy blanket, and then the radio came alive. This is Dakota, eastbound at mile marker 156. A voice crackled, looking for a safe spot. Anyone have a location on the nearest sanctuary? I recognized the handle. Dakota was a regular, a steady voice I had heard before. Another voice cut in deeper and rougher. Westbound hauler at 142. I have something behind me. It's pacing me, gaining slightly. Then a third voice, calm and professional. Channel 19. This is Moonlight. I am holding at the Rock Springs rest area. We have space here. If you can make it, come on back. The coffee is terrible, but the ground is solid. I grabbed my own microphone. Feeling a sense of responsibility surged through me. This is Wyoming Highway Patrol, Unit 7. I am parked at Wamsutter. Any units needing assistance, State your location. I am monitoring. There was a pause, a brief moment of static, and then a new voice broke through. It didn't sound like the seasoned truckers. It sounded younger, tighter with tension. Officer, this is Rabbit. Westbound at mile marker 148. I have a situation. Go ahead, Rabbit, I said, leaning forward. I've got a family in trouble out here. Passenger car. Looks like tourists. Ohio plates. They don't know about the empty. They are pulled over on the shoulder with their hazards on. Can you see them? I am stationary at Wamsutter. I replied. I cannot see them. Are you close? I'm about a quarter mile back, Rabbit said. There is something circling them. One of the things. It's pretending to be a patrol car. My blood ran cold. A mimic. Smokey had warned me about them, but hearing it happening in real time was different. Describe it, Rabbit. It's the wrong shape, Rabbit said, his voice dropping. The lights are too high, but it's got the basic idea. Red and blue. I think it's trying to get them to open their doors. Trust authority, you know? It's using your image, officer. I felt a surge of helplessness. I was stuck in the rest area, bound by the rules of survival. If I drove out there now, I would just be another vulnerable soul in the void. But I couldn't do nothing. Rabbit, can you get between them? I asked, can you disrupt it? I can try, Rabbit said, but I don't know if my rig is going to hold together. I'm running on fumes here. I've been in the empty for 20 minutes longer than I planned. The pressure is getting to the engine. Just get their attention. I urged, use your horn. Use your high beams. Make them aware that they need to move. Break the spell. Copy that, Rabbit said, going in now. I listened to the radio, my hand gripping the microphone, so hard my knuckles turned white. In the background of Rabbit's transmission, I could hear the roar of his engine as he downshifted. Then, the blast of an air horn, a deep, mournful sound that echoed through the static. Come on, folks. I heard Rabbit shouting, not into the radio, but into his own cab, willing the family to hear him. Get moving. That is not a real cop. Get back on the highway. Then a new voice cut in. Panicked, confused. It was the driver of the car, evidently scanning through channels in desperation. Hello? Who is this? What is happening? Sir, this is the Wyoming Highway Patrol. I cut in using my most authoritative voice. There has been an incident on the highway. You are in danger. You need to proceed to the next rest area immediately. Do not stop for any vehicles. Do not exit your car. Just drive. But the police car, it's right here. That is not a police car, sir. I said firmly. Trust me. Just drive. Mile marker 165. Get there as fast as you can. I heard the sound of an engine revving, tires squealing on gravel. They were moving. They're rolling. Rabbit's voice came back, triumphant but strained. They're moving good, but the thing is following them. It's fast. I don't think I can... Static swallowed his voice. Rabbit, I called. Rabbit, do you copy? Nothing but the rhythmic, breathing hiss of the empty. 10 minutes later, a station wagon with Ohio plates came skidding into the Wamsutter rest area. It was a young couple, terrified, with 2 small children in the back. They parked near me, and I walked over to reassure them, to tell them they were safe. But my mind wasn't on them. It was on the radio. It was on the silence where Rabbit's voice used to be. I sat in my car for the rest of the shift, calling his name into the void. Rabbit, come in. Rabbit, report. But the network remained silent. The invisible web had lost a strand. And for the first time, I understood the true cause of the brotherhood I had joined. We were connected, yes, but we were also alone. The transition back to reality at 4:44 a.m. was usually a moment of relief, a collective exhale as the world righted itself. But that morning it fell hollow. The sun began to bleed over the horizon, turning the sky a bruised purple and the familiar shapes of the high desert returned. The station wagon with the Ohio family was still there, the occupants sleeping the exhausted sleep of the saved. But I couldn't rest. I drove west. I had to know. I scanned the highway, looking for signs. Mile marker 148, where Rabbit had first called in. Nothing, just empty asphalt. Mile marker 150, still nothing. I began to hope that perhaps he had just lost radio contact, that he had slipped through a fold in the empty and emerged somewhere else, further down the line. But at mile marker 151, I found him. It didn't look like a crash. That was the first thing that struck me. There were no skid marks, no shattered glass, no debris scattered across the road. There was just the truck. It was a semi-tractor parked on the shoulder, but it was incomplete. The trailer was gone, not detached, but erased. The hitch where it should have been connected ended in a smooth metallic surface, as if the trailer had never existed, and the cab itself was wrong. It looked faded, like a photograph left in the sun for too long. The colors were washed out, the metal dull and non-reflective. I pulled my patrol car behind it and engaged my lights, though there was no traffic to warn. I walked slowly toward the truck, the crunch of my boots on the gravel, sounding impossibly loud in the morning stillness. I climbed up to the driver's side door. It was unlocked. Inside sat Rabbit, or what was left of him. He was still belted into his seat. His hands were still on the wheel, but he was fading. That is the only way I can describe it. He wasn't bloody. He wasn't injured in the conventional sense. He was becoming transparent. I could see the texture of the seat through his chest. His left arm, the one that had been resting on the door, was almost completely gone, just a faint outline of a sleeve. He wasn't dead. His eyes were open, staring straight ahead at the highway. They moved slightly as I opened the door, shifting to look at me. There was no fear in them, only a profound, distant sadness. He tried to speak, his mouth moving, but no sound came out. It was as if his voice had already crossed over, leaving his body behind to catch up. I radioed for medical assistance, my voice shaking. I didn't know what else to do. I followed the procedure, but I knew, deep down, that no ambulance could help this. This wasn't a medical emergency. It was an onological one. Rabbit had stayed too long. He had engaged too closely with the things in the empty to save that family. He had used his own reality as a shield, and the friction had worn him down. By the time the paramedics arrived, Rabbit was gone. Not dead, gone. The seat was empty. The seatbelt was still buckled, holding nothing but air. The only trace of him was a faint warmth on the upholstery and a logbook on the dashboard. I gave my statement to the responding officers. I told them I had found an abandoned truck. I told them the driver was missing. It was a lie, but it was a necessary one. How could I tell them that he had dissolved? That the highway had taken him as payment for the safe passage of strangers? They wrote it up as a missing person case. Another driver who walked away from his rig in the middle of nowhere. It happens sometimes. The road makes people crazy, they said. That night at the truck stop, I found Smokey. He was sitting in his usual booth, staring into his coffee. He didn't look up when I sat down. Rabbit didn't make it, I said quietly. Smokey nodded slowly. I know. I felt it. The network feels it when a link breaks. He saved them. I said, the family. They made it to the rest area because of him. He knew the risks, Smokey said, his voice heavy. Rabbit was a good man. Been running this route for 15 years. He knew that you don't engage the mimics, but he did it anyway. Is it always like this? I asked, feeling a surge of anger. People just vanishing, and we just watch. Smokey looked at me then, his eyes hard. Not always. Sometimes we go weeks, months without losing anyone. But the empty takes its toll. We are playing in a space we don't belong in, David. We are trespassers. Rabbit paid the rent today. It could have been any of us. He died a hero, I said. He didn't die, Smokey corrected me gently. He just ceased to be here. There is a difference. In the empty, nothing is ever truly gone. It just changes state. He's part of the highway now, part of the silence. He poured coffee from his thermos into a spare cup and pushed it toward me. Drink. You need to be alert. The shift starts in 3 hours. You expect me to go back out there? After this? I expect you to do what Rabbit did, Smokey said. I expect you to be there for the next family. Because if we aren't, then Rabbit's sacrifice means nothing. The road goes on, David. It always goes on. I looked at the coffee, then at Smokey, then out the window at the darkening sky. I thought about the young family in the station wagon, safe and sleeping in Rawlins. I thought about Rabbit, fading into the morning light, and I realized Smokey was right. We couldn't stop the empty. We couldn't fight the physics of a broken world, but we could stand in the gap. We could be the ones who remembered the lost. Okay, I said, taking the cup. I'll be there. Good, Smokey said. Welcome to the real network. Now, let me tell you about the gathering. It's time you met the rest of the family. The gathering was held at a place that did not officially exist on any modern map. It was an abandoned truck stop located 30 miles east of Rawlins, a relic from the days before the interstate system had fully sanitized the American road. The asphalt was cracked, weeds pushing through the fissures like grasping fingers, and the main building was a shell of weathered wood and broken glass. But on this particular Saturday night, under the cover of a moonless sky, it was alive. I arrived just after midnight. My patrol car crunched over the gravel, the headlights sweeping across a collection of vehicles that seemed to tell the history of the highway. There were modern rigs, sleek and chromed, parked next to battered pickups from the 70s. There was a rusted station wagon that looked like it hadn't moved in decades, yet its engine block was warm. And there were people. I had expected a somber affair, a wake for Rabbit, and there was certainly an air of mourning, a quiet heaviness that hung over the group. But there was also something else, a sense of reunion, a feeling of family. There were maybe 20 people gathered around a fire that had been built in an old oil drum. They were mostly truckers, men and women in denim and flannel, their faces illuminated by the flickering orange light. But there were others, too. I saw uniforms, highway patrol officers from Nebraska and Utah, a state maintenance worker in his reflective vest, and a man in a tweed jacket who looked like he belonged in a university library rather than a desert wasteland. Smokey was there, of course. He stood near the fire, a styrofoam cup in his hand, looking like the patriarch of a lost tribe. He waved me over as I approached. "David," he said, his voice carrying over the crackle of the flames. "Glad you made it. Everyone, this is the new guardian of the Rawlins stretch. This is the one who was with Rabbit on the wire." Faces turned toward me. There was no suspicion in their eyes, only recognition. They nodded, murmuring greetings. In this group, if you knew about the empty, you were blood. A woman stepped forward. She was tall, with sharp features and a badge that identified her as Janala, a patrol officer from Nebraska. She extended a hand. "Welcome to the fold," she said. "Smokey says you have good instincts." "I'm learning," I said, shaking her hand. "I wish the tuition wasn't so high." "We all do," she replied quietly. "But that's why we meet, to share what we know, to keep the tuition from getting any higher." That night, standing under the vast, uncaring canopy of the Milky Way, I received an education that went far beyond the practical survival tips Smokey had given me. This was the history, the philosophy, the deep theory of the empty. Janala explained the scope of the phenomenon. "It's not just Wyoming," she said, using a stick to draw a line in the dirt. "The empty touches Interstate 80 all the way from the cornfields of Nebraska to the salt flats of Utah. It's a corridor, a vein, different intensities in different places, but it's all connected. We think the highway itself is the key." The man in the tweed jacket spoke up. He was introduced as Dr. Darren Webb, a geologist who had spent years studying the rock formations along the interstate. "It is about the path," he said, his voice nervous but excited. "Interstate 80 follows the path of the Transcontinental Railroad, which followed the old wagon trails, which followed Native American trade routes. There is a groove worn into the earth here. Humans have been moving along this specific line of latitude for thousands of years. That kind of energy, that kind of constant, linear motion, it leaves a mark. It thins a fabric. So we made it," I asked, "by driving?" "In a way," Dr. Webb nodded. "Or perhaps the weakness was always here, and we just kept picking at the scab until it opened. We built a river of concrete through a desert of silence. It was bound to create friction. And the things?" I asked. "The shadows? What are they?" "Reflections," Webb suggested. "Echoes of travelers from other times? Or maybe they are entities from a parallel vibration. Try to use the corridor just like we are. Think about it. We enter the empty during the third shift, but maybe from their perspective, they are entering our reality. Maybe they are just as confused by us as we are by them." An old trucker named Bill, whose face looked like leather left out in the sun, spat into the fire. "Don't anthropomorphize them, Doc," he growled. "I've seen what they do. I've seen them hunt. They aren't confused travelers. They are predators. They know exactly what they're doing." The debate continued into the night, a mixture of science, folklore, and hard-earned experience. They shared survival strategies, new patterns they had noticed, shifts in the timing, mile markers where the static was getting louder. They spoke of the sudden temperature drops that preceded a manifestation. They talked about the shifting stars, mapping the alien constellations they had seen in the void, and they shared the losses. Smokey pulled out a battered notebook, the same one I had seen before. He opened it to a page filled with names and dates. It went back to 1971. "We write them down," he said softly, "because the official reports won't. To the state, they are missing persons, unsolved accidents, runaways, but to us they are the toll." He took a pen and added a name to the bottom of the list. "Rabbit, May 1989. We stood in silence for a moment, watching the ink dry in the firelight. It was a solemn ritual, a way of anchoring the loss of the world they had left behind. As the gathering began to break up around 4 a.m., just before the shift was set to begin, Janala pulled me aside. "There is one more thing you should know," she said, her voice lowered. "There are people who go into the empty voluntarily, every night." "Why?" I asked, stunned. "Why would anyone choose that?" "They are looking for something," she said. "Lost loved ones. Family members who disappeared on the highway years ago. The empty doesn't follow normal time, David. It is non-linear. It is entirely possible that someone who vanished in 1975 is still out there, still driving that same stretch of road, trapped in that same 71 minutes. So, people go searching. They think they can bring them home. Have they ever found anyone?" "Once, maybe," she said, looking toward the dark horizon. "A woman named Diane. She spent 2 years going into the empty every night, looking for her husband who had disappeared in 82. One night, she radioed that she had found him, that he was alive, that she was bringing him home. And we never saw either of them again," Janala said. "Maybe they made it out. Maybe they just went deeper in together. We don't know." I drove home as the sun came up, my head full of stories and theories. The gathering had shown me that I was part of something much larger than myself. I wasn't just patrolling a road. I was guarding a frontier. And as I watched the sunrise paint the desert gold, I wondered about Diane, Rabbit, and all the others who were still out there, driving forever on the road that never ends. The stories told around the fire at the gathering had settled into my mind like sediment in a riverbed, layering themselves over my own experiences. But one story, in particular, haunted me. It was a name that Smokey had mentioned only in passing, but with a tone that suggested a warning. Mark Patterson. A few nights after the gathering, I found Smokey at the diner again. I needed to know more. I needed to understand the limits of what was possible and the consequences of pushing too far. Who was he? I asked, sliding into the booth opposite him. Mark Patterson. You mentioned him when we talked about communicating with the entities. Smokey sighed, putting down his mug. He looked tired. The lines around his eyes seemed deeper tonight. I was hoping you wouldn't ask about Mark, he said. He is the cautionary tale. The example we use to scare the rookies straight. I need to know, I insisted. If I'm going to be out there, I need to know the worst-case scenario. All right, Smokey nodded. Mark was a state trooper out of Utah. This was back in '79. He was young, smart, ambitious. Too smart for his own good. Maybe he didn't just want to survive the empty, David. He wanted to understand it. He treated it like a crime scene that could be solved or a puzzle that could be unlocked. Smokey leaned back, looking at the ceiling as if reading the memory from the smoke-stained tiles. Mark started staying in the empty longer than he had to. He would park in the hot zones, not to hide, but to watch. He started recording the static, analyzing the patterns. He was convinced that the entities weren't just mindless forces. He believed they had a language. He believed they were trying to talk to us. Was he right? I asked. That's the dangerous part, Smokey said. Maybe he was. He started claiming he could hear voices in the white noise. Not just distress calls, but conversations. He said they were beautiful. He said they were singing. I felt a chill run down my spine. The idea of the shadows singing was more terrifying than any monster. He got obsessed, Smokey continued. He stopped sleeping. He stopped eating. He lived for the third shift. He started taking risks, trying to interact with the things. He would flash his lights and patterns, trying to get a response. And one night he got one. What happened? He radioed in, Smokey said, his voice dropping to a whisper. I was on the channel that night. I heard it. He sounded ecstatic. He said, I made contact. They are inviting me in. It's not a void, Smokey, it's a bridge. I'm going across. And then, that was the last transmission. His patrol car was found the next morning at mile marker 175. It was parked perfectly on the shoulder. The engine was running. The doors were open, but Mark was gone. Like Rabbit? I asked. No. Smokey shook his head. Not like Rabbit. Rabbit was erased. Mark left something behind. His car. It had changed. Changed how? The interior, Smokey said, his face grim. The seats, the dashboard, the steering wheel, they weren't made of plastic and vinyl anymore. They were organic. They looked like they had been grown, not built. The texture was wrong. It was halfway between a machine and something alive. The state police impounded it immediately. They tried to investigate, but the lab guys couldn't explain what they were seeing. It defied biology and engineering. Eventually, they crushed the car, cubed it, and buried it. They didn't want people asking questions. So Mark went with them. I asked. He joined them. That's the theory, Smokey said. He wanted to understand them so badly that he became one of them. Or maybe they just consumed him. We don't know. But sometimes... Smokey hesitated. Sometimes what? Sometimes, on really clear nights, in the deep static, you can hear a voice. It doesn't sound human anymore. It sounds like grinding metal and wind, but it has a cadence. It sounds like it's trying to recite the police code. It sounds like Mark. I sat in silence, letting the horror of the story sink in. It was a stark reminder of the danger of curiosity. The empty wasn't just a physical threat. It was a seductive one. It offered answers to questions that shouldn't be asked. Don't try to make friends with it, David, Smokey said, reaching across the table to tap my hand. Don't try to solve it. Respect it. Fear it. Survive it. But don't let it in. Once you open that door, you can't close it. I drove my shift that night. with a new kind of vigilance. I watched the shadows with suspicion. I listened to the static with a guarded ear. But as I drove through the silence, I couldn't help but wonder, what had Mark Patterson seen? What had he heard that was so beautiful it made him walk out his life and into the void? The question was a seed planted deep in my mind, and I knew I would have to work hard to keep it from growing. The legend of Mark Patterson wasn't just a story. It was a ghost that rode in the passenger seat of every patrol car on the interstate. Over the next few weeks, I developed a routine that bordered on the obsessive. I mapped every rest area, every pull-off, every inch of gravel where a car could safely hide. I memorized the mile markers where the empty was most active, creating a mental atlas of the invisible world. I learned to read the signs, the way the air grew heavy before the shift, the way the radio static would begin to pulse like a heartbeat. I became a regular voice on the channel, guiding stranded drivers, warning tourists away from the mimics, doing the work that Smokey had trained me for. But with each night spent in the empty, I noticed something changing within myself. It was subtle at first, like the shifting of sand dunes in the wind. The third shift started feeling less alien. The wrongness of the world between 3:33 a.m. and 4:44 a.m. became familiar, almost comforting. The silence didn't press down on me as hard as it used to. I found that I could drive through the void for longer periods without that rising tide of panic that had defined my early shifts. And that scared me more than anything. I remember what Smokey had said about the people who chose to stay, about the empty having its own kind of peace. I was starting to understand that peace. It was a seductive numbness, a liberation from the messy, loud, painful reality of the human world. In the empty, there were no bills to pay, no broken relationships, no precinct politics. There was only the road, the car, and the eternal motion. One night, about 6 weeks after my first encounter, I was parked at the Wamsutter rest area. The shift was in full swing. The world outside was blue-tinted and silent. I was watching the entrance ramp, my usual vigil, when I saw a vehicle approach. At first glance, it looked like a patrol car. It was the same model as mine, a boxy sedan with a familiar light bar on the roof. But as it turned into the lot, the details began to separate from the expectation. The lights were a shade too violet. The shape of the car was slightly elongated, as if it had been stretched by speed. And the movement, it was too smooth. It glided over the pavement without a tremor, as if it weren't touching the ground at all. It pulled into the spot directly next to mine. I froze. The rules were clear. The entities didn't come into the rest areas. This was sanctuary. But this vehicle had just broken a rule. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out. He was wearing a Wyoming Highway Patrol uniform. The tan shirt, the dark trousers, the badge catching the dim light. From a distance, he looked like a colleague. But as he walked toward my car, the illusion began to fray. His proportions were almost right, but not quite. His arms were slightly too long. His walk was fluid, lacking the weight of a human step. He stopped at my window and looked in. His face was a landscape of almost human features. He had eyes, a nose, a mouth, but they were arranged with symmetry that felt artificial. He smiled, and the expression didn't reach his eyes. It was a muscle movement, not an emotion. Then he spoke, but his voice didn't come through the glass. It came through my radio. "You are adapting well, Officer Gabberry." The sound was clear, devoid of static, resonating in the small cabin of my car. I stared at him, my hand instinctively reaching for the microphone, though I knew it was useless. "Soon," the voice continued, "you won't need to hide in the rest areas. Soon you will be able to drive the empty freely. Like us, like I do." A jolt of recognition hit me. I had seen this face before in a photograph Smokey had shown me. It was younger then, more human, but the underlying structure was the same. "Patterson?" I whispered. "Mark Patterson?" The figure's smile widened, stretching the skin in a way that looked painful. "I learned the truth, David," Patterson said. The empty isn't a curse. It isn't a trap. It is an evolution. What happened to you? I asked, my voice trembling. I stopped fighting, he said. I stopped trying to anchor myself to a world that is small and slow. Why limit yourself to 71 minutes? Why hide in parking lots? The highway goes on forever here. Forever and nowhere. It is beautiful, David. You will see. I don't want to see, I said, gripping the steering wheel. I want to stay human. I want to go home when the sun comes up. Patterson's face softened into an expression that mimicked pity. You are already changing. Can't you feel it? Every night you spend in the empty, you become more like us, more like me. Eventually, you won't want to go back. The real world will seem loud and bright and painful. You will choose the empty. They always do. He turned and walked back to his car. His movement was a glide, a dance. He got in, and the vehicle backed out of the space with impossible precision. It merged onto the highway and accelerated, disappearing into the west not with the roar of an engine, but with a fading hum. I sat there until 4:44 a.m., shaking uncontrollably. When the world snapped back to reality, when the sun rose and the truck started moving, I didn't feel relief. I felt tainted. I drove back to Rawlins, went to my apartment, and stood in front of the mirror for a long time. I looked for changes. I looked for the elongation of my features, for the coldness of my eyes. I looked the same, but I felt different. The seed that Patterson had planted, the idea that the empty was an evolution, not a prison, was taking root, and that terrified me more than any monster on the road. After my encounter with the thing that used to be Mark Patterson, I became obsessed with understanding the nature of the empty, not because I wanted to join it as he had, but because I needed to know what I was fighting against. I needed to know what I was becoming. I started keeping detailed logs, just as he had done. Every night, I documented everything. The vehicles that weren't quite vehicles, the way the highway seemed to breathe, the patterns and the wrongness. I filled 3 notebooks in 2 months. Smokey noticed a change in me. You are thinking too hard about it, David, he warned one night at the diner. That is how it gets you. Patterson thought he could understand it. Look where that got him. I am not trying to join it, I argued. I am trying to predict it. Every phenomenon has patterns, even this one. The empty isn't a phenomenon, Smokey said, cutting his steak with precise, angry movements. It is a place, and places don't follow rules we can understand. But you aren't listening. You're already halfway down the rabbit hole. I couldn't listen, because every night I spent in the empty, I felt my senses sharpening. My reaction time was faster. My night vision was clearer. I could sense when something was wrong seconds before it manifested. I was adapting, just as Patterson had said, and while part of me was terrified, another part of me, the part that loved the deep silence, was thrilled. 3 months into my patrol of the 3rd shift, I encountered something that broke through my careful documentation and my growing confidence. It was a Tuesday night, unremarkable except for the unusually clear skies. I had parked at the Wamsutter rest area, as usual, waiting out the clock. At 3:47 a.m., a voice came through Channel 19. This is a family traveling east on I-80. We need help. Our car is overheating. We are at mile marker 133. Is there anyone who can assist? The voice was calm, professional. Too calm for someone stranded in a reality that was dissolving around them. I grabbed my mic. This is Wyoming Highway Patrol. Sir, can you describe your vehicle? It is a 1987 Dodge Caravan, blue. We have children with us. The engine started smoking about 10 minutes ago. Something was wrong. I checked my notes. Mile marker 133 was a hot zone. It was where Jimmy Henderson had lost his mind. It was one of the most active areas in the empty. No one should be stopped there, and certainly no one should be sounding that composed while parked in the belly of the beast. Sir, I asked, what time is it by your watch? There was a pause, a hesitation. It is 3:48 a.m. Why? The hair on the back of my neck stood up. Normal people didn't know the time in the empty. Watches stopped working. Car clocks went dark or flashed random numbers. The temporal distortion was one of the first things travelers noticed. This voice knew the time because it was watching the time. This wasn't a stranded family. It was a mimic. Negative on assistance. I replied carefully, keeping my voice steady. Proceed to the nearest rest area. Wamsutter is at mile marker 173. I will meet you there. We can't drive, the voice insisted, a slight edge of panic entering the tone now. But it felt rehearsed. The engine is dead. Please. We have children. We need help now. Then I heard it. In the background of the transmission, there was the sound of a child crying. But it wasn't right. The cry was a loop. It repeated the exact same intonation, the exact same gasp for breath, every 4 seconds. It was a recording, or a simulation. Smokey's voice cut in on the channel. David, don't engage. It's mimicking. They do that sometimes. Testing us. How do you know? I asked, because that same family has been calling for help since 1985. Smokey said grimly, I have got their distress call logged. Same voice, same car, same mile marker. It is a trap. I switched off my CB radio for a moment. Sitting in the dark silence of my car, I watched the digital clock on my dashboard, the numbers glowing green. Outside, the wind howled silently. I turned the radio back on. The voice was still there. Please, is anyone there? The children are cold. It's getting dark. It was heartbreaking. It was designed to be heartbreaking. It was a weaponized appeal to empathy. The empty knew what we were. It knew we were protectors. It knew we couldn't stand by and let people suffer. So it created suffering to draw us in. I sat there, listening to the thing pretending to be a father, listening to the loop of the crying child. Other voices from the network joined in, warning people away. Stay clear, 133. Rabbit would have said if he were still here. Now it was others. Don't listen to them. Keep driving. But what bothered me most wasn't the trap itself. It was the quality of the mimicry. It wasn't just imitating. It was learning. The emotional nuance in the voice was better than it had been in the stories I heard. It was evolving. How long before we couldn't tell the difference? How long before mimics sounded so real, so desperate, that even Smokey would be fooled? At 4:44 a.m., the world returned. I drove to mile marker 133. There was nothing there, just the empty highway, the wind blowing dust across the asphalt. No tire tracks, no sign of a breakdown. But the air in that spot felt cold, colder than the rest of the desert. I lingered for a moment, feeling the hunger of the place, before driving on. The trap had been set, and though it failed tonight, I knew it would be waiting for the next compassionate soul who passed by in the dark. The following night, I decided to do something risky. I had been researching the history of Interstate 80, looking for patterns, trying to pinpoint when the empty had started. Dr. Webb, the geologist from the network, had given me access to old records, construction documents, and incident reports. What I found was disturbing. The empty wasn't new. It had always been there, or something like it had. In 1869, when the Transcontinental Railroad was being built through Wyoming, there were reports of workers disappearing during the early morning hours, swallowed by the desert. In 1926, when the Lincoln Highway was constructed, the precursor to I-80, there were similar incidents, motorists vanishing between 3 o'clock and 5 a.m. The empty predated the interstate. The highway had just made it more accessible, more regular. And there was another pattern I noticed. Every 7 years, the activity spiked. More disappearances, more sightings, more intensity. The last spike had been in 1987, 2 years ago. We were in a quiet period. But the quiet periods were when the empty tried new things. 2 weeks later, I made a mistake. I was on patrol, parked at a rest area near Point Rocks. It was 3:38 a.m., 5 minutes into the shift. The world was quiet, the sky a deep, bruised purple. Then I saw a vehicle struggling on the highway. It wasn't a shadow or a glitch. It was clearly human. A beat-up pickup truck, an old Ford with Wyoming plates, rust on the bumper. It was losing speed, smoke pouring from the exhaust. I knew I should stay parked. The rules were clear, but I could see the driver through the windshield. It was a young woman, maybe 25, pounding on the steering wheel in frustration and terror. She was real. She was in trouble. I made a choice. I started my engine and pulled out of the rest area onto the empty highway. My radio immediately lit up with voices. "Gabberry, what are you doing?" It was Smokey. "Get back to the rest area." "That is a civilian," I replied, my voice calm and determined. "I can't just watch her get taken." "You can and you should," Smokey urged. "This is what they do, David. They use our compassion against us." But I was already moving, accelerating to catch up with a struggling truck. As I got closer, I could see the details clearly. The sticker on the rear window, the dent in the tailgate. It was undeniably real. I pulled alongside and motioned for her to roll down her window. She did, tears streaming down her face. "My truck died," she shouted over the wind. "What is happening? Where are all the lights?" "Follow me," I shouted back. "Stay close. I will lead you to safety." I pulled ahead, keeping my speed steady, watching in the mirror to make sure she was keeping up. The next rest area was 8 miles ahead. We could make it. That's when I saw it. In my rearview mirror, behind the woman's truck, something was forming. It wasn't one of the usual amorphous shapes. It looked like a patrol car. My patrol car. Same model, same color, same unit number on the roof. It was matching my speed exactly, mirroring my movements. When I drifted slightly to the left, it drifted to the left. The woman saw it, too. She accelerated, trying to get away from it, but the thing matched her speed instantly. It wasn't chasing her. It was copying me. It was using me as a template. "Smokey," I said into the radio, "I have a problem. There is something mimicking my patrol car. What do I do?" "Kill your engine right now," Smokey said, his voice tight. "Don't give it anything to copy." "I can't," I said. "I have a civilian following me. If I stop, she is vulnerable." "If you don't kill your engine," Smokey warned, "that thing is going to become a perfect copy of you, and then it will be loose in our world. Is that what you want?" I looked in the mirror. The copy was getting more detailed. I could see a driver inside now, wearing a highway patrol uniform. The face was indistinct, a blur of flesh tones, but it was forming. It was refining itself. I made a split-second decision. "Ma'am," I yelled over the PA system. "Drive to the rest area. Do not stop. I will hold it off." I hit the brakes, my car skidding on the asphalt. The woman's truck shot past me, heading for safety. The mimic behind her didn't react to her. It reacted to me. It slammed on its brakes at the exact same moment, stopping 50 yards away. We sat there on the highway, facing the same direction. Two identical cars in a silent world. I watched the driver in the other car. The face was sharpening. It was becoming my face. I could see the eyes, the set of the jaw. It was like looking into a mirror that hated you. "Who are you?" I whispered. The radio crackled. "Who are you?" my own voice asked back. It wasn't a recording. It was me, speaking in real time. "I am David Gabberry," I said. "I was born in Chicago. My mother's name is Martha." The radio was silent for a moment. The mimic couldn't access my memories. It could only copy my surface. "I am David Gabberry." The voice repeated, but it sounded hollow. "I was born on the highway. My mother is the empty." I put the car in reverse. The mimic put the car in reverse. We were locked in a dance. I knew I couldn't outrun it. I had to outthink it. I had to do something it couldn't copy. I reached into my glove compartment and pulled out a photograph of my family. It was small, battered, something I kept for comfort. I held it up to the windshield. The mimic paused. It leaned forward, squinting. It didn't understand the object. It didn't have a reference for sentimental value. "You are just an echo," I said into the radio. "You don't have this. You don't have a history." For a second, the face in the other car flickered. The features lost their cohesion, sliding back into a blur. The car itself seemed to waver, the edges becoming smoky and indistinct. I had broken its focus. I slammed the car into drive and floored it. The mimic hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, but that was enough. I sped toward the rest area, watching the rearview mirror. The thing tried to follow, but it was losing its form. It couldn't hold the shape without the template. By the time I hit the exit ramp, it was just a shadow again, fading into the dark. I parked next to the woman's truck. She was inside, safe, sobbing with relief. I sat in my car, trembling. I had saved her, but I had seen something that shook me to my core. The empty wasn't just reflecting the world. It was trying to replace it. And for a moment, looking at that other driver, I wasn't sure which one of us was real. The encounter with the mimic left a mark on me that went deeper than fear. It was a philosophical wound. I returned to Rawlins when the sun came up, but the city felt thin. The buildings looked like stage sets. The people walking their dogs, the cars stopping at traffic lights. It all felt performative. I found myself touching objects, my coffee cup, the steering wheel, the rough brick of the police station wall, just to reassure myself of their solidity. I began to question my own nature. If the empty could create such a perfect copy of me, down to the voice and the uniform, what did that say about me? Was I truly unique? Or was I just a collection of habits and appearances that could be replicated by a sufficiently advanced anomaly? "You are spiraling," Smokey told me a few nights later. We were at the truck stop, but I hadn't touched my food. "You saved the girl. You beat the mimic. Take the win." It knew my name, I said quietly. It had my face. Smokey, for a second, I felt like I was a reflection. I felt like it was a real one, and I was just a shadow trying to keep up. Smokey put down his fork. "That is a trap, David. The empty doesn't just bend light. It bends your sense of self. It makes you doubt your own reality. That is how it keeps you. If you start believing you are just an echo, you will eventually fade away like one." "How do you stop it?" I asked. "How do you stay real?" "You anchor yourself," he said. "You find things that the empty cannot touch. Memories, pain, love, things that aren't physical." He pulled up his sleeve to reveal a scar on his forearm. It was jagged and old. "I got this in '74, he said, trying to fix a fan belt in a blizzard. "It hurt like hell. Every time I look at it, I remember the cold, the pain, the smell of the grease. The empty can't copy that. It can copy the scar, but it can't copy the story behind it." I looked at my own hands. They were unblemished, smooth. I realized I had been living my life in a state of numbness, running away from the pain of Chicago, seeking silence. But silence, I was learning, was dangerous. Silence was a canvas for the empty to paint on. "I need to go deeper," I said suddenly. Smokey stared at me. "What?" "I need to understand what is at the center of it. I have been patrolling the edges. Smokey, I have been hiding in rest areas. But Patterson, he went in. Rabbit, he engaged. I need to know what generates the signal." "No," Smokey said, his voice hard. "Absolutely not. You go deep, you don't come back. There are no rest areas past a certain point. The physics break down completely." "I have a theory," I said, leaning forward. "The 7-year cycle, the spikes, it is all connected to geology. Dr. Webb was right. The highway is a scar, but scars can heal, or they can be reopened. I think there is a source, a focal point. If I can find it, you will end up like Patterson, Smokey said. Or worse. You will end up like a story told around a fire that no one believes. I have to try, I said. I can't keep doing this every night. Smokey, watching people fade, watching mimics wear our faces. There has to be a way to close the door, or at least lock it. Smokey looked at me for a long time. He saw the resolve in my eyes, the same look he must have seen in Patterson's eyes a decade ago. He sighed, a sound of resignation. If you go, he said, you go alone. I won't lead you there. And the network, we can't help you if you go off the map. I know, I said. There is a place, Smokey said quietly, lowering his voice. Past Wamsiter, mile marker 119. It doesn't look like much, just a stretch of straight road. But the old-timers say that is where the static starts. That is where the radio waves originate. If there's a center, it's there. 119, I repeated. David, Smokey said, grabbing my wrist, think about this. You are a good cop. You are a good man. You don't have to be a martyr. I am not trying to be a martyr, I said, pulling my hand away gently. I am trying to be a patrolman. And patrolmen check out the source of disturbance. I left the diner and drove to my apartment. I didn't sleep. I spent the day organizing my affairs, writing letters I would probably never send, and staring at the map of Wyoming on my wall. Mile marker 119. It was in the middle of the Red Desert, a place of red sand and ancient silence. That night, I didn't go to the station. I didn't check in with my sergeant. I put on my uniform not out of duty, but out of habit. It was my armor. I got into my personal car. My patrol car was too conspicuous, and I didn't want to involve the department in my madness. I drove out to the highway. I waited for the clock to hit 3:33 a.m., and when the world shifted, when the stars changed and the silence fell, I didn't pull into a rest area. I didn't hide. I turned west, drove past the sanctuary of Wamsiter, and headed toward mile marker 119. I was driving into the heart of the empty, and for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what I would find. I was afraid of what I would leave behind. I drove past the point of no return. The Wamsiter rest area, usually my sanctuary, was a blur of blue light in my peripheral vision, and then it was gone. I was alone on the road, deeper than I had ever been. The silence here was different. It wasn't just the absence of noise. It was a physical weight pressing against the windows of the car. The static on the radio had changed, too. It wasn't the rhythmic breathing Smokey had described. It was a chaotic, multi-tonal hum, like a choir of voices singing in a language that had no vowels. Mile marker 125 passed, then 122. As I approached mile marker 119, the landscape began to shift in ways that defied geography. The high desert scrub vanished, replaced by a flat, obsidian plain that seemed to absorb the light of my headlamps. The sky above was no longer black or purple. It was a swirling gray mist, illuminated from within by unseen lightning. And then I saw it. Rising out of the darkness was a structure. It shouldn't have been there. There were no buildings on this stretch of I-80. But there it stood, a gas station. It wasn't modern. It looked like something from a postcard sent in 1955. A small, white building with a pitched roof, 2 pumps out front with glass globes on top, and a sign that simply read service in red, peeling paint. I slowed down. The pull of the place was magnetic. It felt like the center of a whirlpool. I turned off the highway and rolled onto cracked concrete of the station's forecourt. My tires crunched on gravel that sounded too loud in the stillness. I parked near the pumps. There was a light on inside the station, a warm, yellow glow that spilled out through the dusty windows. I hesitated. This was the trap Smokey had warned me about. This was the lure. But I had come here for answers, and I couldn't turn back now. I stepped out of the car. The air smelled of ozone and old gasoline. I walked toward the glass door, my reflection ghosting the pane. I pushed it open. A bell jingled. a cheerful, mundane sound that felt violently out of place. Inside, the station was a museum of a lost era. There were racks of glass soda bottles, shelves lined with oil cans that bore logos of defunct companies, and a calendar on the wall from 1958. Behind the counter stood a man. He was wiping a wrench with a rag. He wore a mechanic's jumpsuit, stained with grease, with the name AL stitched over the pocket. He looked up as I entered. His face was weathered, lined with the same desert geography I saw in Smokey, but his eyes were different. They were completely black. No iris, no scara. Just deep, endless wells. "You're late," he said. His voice didn't sound like it came from his throat. It sounded like it came from the corners of the room. "Late for what?" I asked, keeping my hand near my radio, though I knew it was useless here. "For your shift," Al said. He put down the wrench. "You've been driving around edges for months, officer. About time you came to the source." "What is this place?" I asked. "Is this the center?" "Center implies a circle," Al said, leaning on the counter. "This isn't a circle. It's a knot, a tangle in the string." He gestured to the window. "You think you're driving on a highway. You think you're moving from point A to point B. But you're not moving at all. The road is moving through you. The empty, it's just a space where the movement stops." "Why here?" I pressed. "Why Interstate 80? Why Wyoming?" Al laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "Why anywhere? Because the wind blows hardest here? Because the rock is oldest? Or maybe because you people built a road right over the top of a place that want to be left alone? You scarred the land, David, and now the land is scarring you back." He reached under the counter and pulled out a map. He spread it out. It wasn't a map of Wyoming. It was a map of time. Lines spiraled and intersected, looping back on themselves. I saw dates written on the curves: 1869, 1926, 1989, 1996. "You're in the loop now," Al said. "You crossed the threshold. You can't just drive back to Rawlins and file a report. You're a part of the geography." "I want to leave," I said. "I want to go back to my life." "Do you?" Al looked at me with those terrible black eyes. "Do you really? Or do you want to stay here where it's quiet, where you don't have to worry about the noise of the city? You ran away from Chicago because you wanted silence. Well, here it is, the ultimate silence. The silence that never ends." He was right. A part of me, the part that had been seduced by the empty, wanted to stay. It was peaceful here. There was no pain. There was no loss. Just the eternal presence of the gas station and the gray sky. "I have a duty," I said, my voice strengthening. "I have people to protect." "Protection is an illusion," Al said. "But if you insist..." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a key. It was an old brass key, heavy and tarnished. "This unlocks the back door. It leads to the service road. It's a shortcut. It might get you back to 1989. Or it might drop you in 1955. Or it might just leave you in the dark forever. It's a gamble." He tossed the key on the counter. It landed with a heavy thud. I looked at the key, then at Al. "Why are you helping me?" "I'm not helping you," Al said, picking up his wrench again. "I'm just the attendant. I service the vehicles. And you, David, you're running on empty. You need a refill." I grabbed the key. I didn't look back. I walked to the rear of the shop, found a heavy steel door, and unlocked it. I stepped through into the dark. I stepped through the door and found myself not on a service road, but standing on the shoulder of a highway. The gas station was gone. The obsidian plain was gone. I was back on the familiar asphalt of Interstate 80, but something was different. The air was shimmering like heat haze, even though it was freezing cold. I walked back to my car, which was parked where I had left it. I got in and started the engine. The radio was buzzing with a strange rhythmic pulse. "David," the voice came through the speakers. It wasn't Smokey. It wasn't Al. It was Me. David, are you there? I picked up the mic. Who is this? It's you, the voice said. Or rather, it's a version of you that didn't go into the gas station. The version that stayed on the road. My head spun. What are you talking about? The empty splits us, the voice explained. Every time you make a choice in here, it creates an echo. I'm the echo that turned back at mile marker 119. You're the one that went in. So I'm not real? I asked, a wave of nausea hitting me. We're both real, the voice said, and we're both fading. That's the price of the deep empty. You can't exist in two places at once forever. One of us has to go. Go where? Back. Or away. The timeline can't support two David Gabberys. One of us has to finish the shift. The other has to stay here and become part of the road. I realized then what I had meant about the gamble. I hadn't just taken a shortcut. I had split my own existence. I was facing the ultimate existential test. Was I the survivor, or was I the sacrifice? I have to go back, I said. I have a life. I have a job. So do I, the voice said, but look at your hands. I looked down. My hands on the steering wheel were translucent. I could see the leather texture of the wheel through my fingers. I was fading. You went too deep, the voice said gently. You touched the source. You can't take that back to the world. It would tear you apart. You belong to the empty now. Tears pricked my eyes, not out of fear, but out of a profound sense of loss. I realized he was right. I felt light, untethered. The memories of Chicago, of my mother, of the precinct. They felt like stories I had read in a book, not things I had lived. What happens to you? I asked the voice. If I stay, I'll wake up in Rawlins, the voice said. I remember a strange night, a bad dream. I go on patrol. I grow old. I live the life you wanted. And me, you become the guardian, the voice said, the permanent one. You become the legend. You become the ghost trooper. You can save people in ways I can't. You can drive through the storms. You can scare away the mimics. You have power here, David. Power that comes from being part of the place. I thought about Rabbit. I thought about Mark Patterson. I thought about all the lost souls on the highway. If I stayed, I wouldn't be lost. I would be stationed. I would be the lighthouse keeper on the edge of the world. Will I remember? I asked, will I remember who I was? For a while, the voice said, but eventually, the road washes it all away. You'll just be the drive. You'll just be the service. I looked out at the horizon. The sun was threatening to rise, a faint gray line in the east. I knew I had seconds to decide. Okay, I whispered. Okay, you take the life. I'll take the shift. Thank you, the voice said. It sounded relieved and sad. Drive safe, David. You too. The radio clicked off. The shimmering in the air stopped. I looked at my hands. They were still translucent, ghostly against the dark interior of the car. But the fear was gone. I felt a sense of purpose settle over me, heavier and more solid than my own body. I put the car in gear. I didn't turn toward Rawlins. I turned west, toward the endless dark. I wasn't going home. I was home. The third shift was my reality now. The other David. The one who would wake up in his bed with a headache and a vague sense of unease. He would live the human life. I would live the eternal one. I drove. The highway stretched out before me, infinite and welcoming. The stars above were the wrong stars, the bright blue constellations of the empty, and for the first time, I recognized them. They weren't alien anymore. They were my navigation points. I was the echo. I was the shadow, and I had a job to do. Somewhere ahead, a family was broken down, frightened in the dark. A mimic was circling, and I was the only one who could stop it. I hit the siren, not the wail of a police car, but a sound that vibrated to the fabric of the night, and I accelerated. The ghost of Interstate 80 was on patrol. The years that followed were not measured in calendars or birthdays, but in the revolutions of wheels and the phases of the moon. To the world outside, the timeline moved forward. The 80s gave way to the 90s. The cars on the highway changed shapes, becoming rounder, more aerodynamic. The music drifting from their open windows shifted from rock ballads to grunge and hip-hop. The technology in the cabs of the trucks evolved. GPS screens began to replace paper maps, and cell phones started to appear in the hands of drivers. But for me, time was a loop. I existed in the scene between 3:33 a.m. and 4:44 a.m. My reality was the 71 minutes of the third shift, stretched out into an eternity. I was the ghost trooper, the guardian of the void. I watched my other self, the solid David. From a distance, I would see him sometimes, parked at the Wamsutter rest area, his face lined with fatigue he couldn't explain. He had kept his promise. He lived a life. He rose through the ranks, became a sergeant, married a kind woman from Rawlins, and grew gray. But he never came back to the deep empty. He stayed on the surface, patrolling the daylight and the early evening, sensing perhaps that a part of him was already out here, doing the work he was too afraid to finish. My existence was a slow, beautiful fade. At first, I held on to the memories of my humanity like precious stones. I recited the names of my childhood friends. I recalled the smell of rain on Chicago pavement. I remembered the taste of hot coffee. But as the years turned, these things began to slip away. They didn't disappear violently. They just eroded like sandstone in the wind. The sensation of touch dulled. The need for sleep vanished. I became a creature of pure purpose. I became a myth among the night drivers. They talked about me on the radio. "You ever see Unit 7? They would ask in the hushed tones of the early morning. "The ghost of Rawlins?" "Yeah," another would answer. "Saw him last winter. I was sliding on black ice near mile marker 140. Thought I was going into the ditch. Then I saw those lights. Not red and blue, but white and gold. He nudged me back on the road. Never touched my bumper, just guided me with the air pressure. Saved my life. They say he's been out here since '89. Longer." An old-timer would chime in. "The spirit's been here forever. It just wears a different uniform now." I saved hundreds of them. I guided lost families away from the mimics. I stood guard over broken-down rigs while the drivers slept, unaware that the shadows were circling just beyond the light of my high beams. I learned the language of the static. I learned to sing back to the void, not in words, but in presence. I became the antibody of the highway, the force that kept the infection of the empty from spreading. But the fade continued. By 1992, I could no longer step out of my car. My legs felt insubstantial, like smoke. I was fused to the machine. The steering wheel was my bone. The engine was my heart. I was no longer a man driving a car. I was the car itself, a sentient construct of metal and memory patrolling the night. I remember one night in particular. It was a Tuesday, always a quiet night. I found Smokey parked at Point of Rocks. He was old now, truly old. His beard was white, his hands trembling as he held his coffee. He was retired, technically, but he still drove the route in his pickup, unable to let go of the watch. I pulled alongside him. I didn't roll down my window. I couldn't anymore, but I spoke through the radio. "Evening, Smokey." He looked at my car. He couldn't see me through the tint, but he smiled. A sad, proud smile. "Evening, David, or whatever you are now." "I am still here," I said, "still watching." "You're fading, son," Smokey said softly. "I can hear it in your voice. It sounds like the wind now, like distance." "It doesn't hurt," I told him. "It feels light. It feels right." "How much longer?" he asked. "I don't know. Until the job is done. Or until I become the road." "You did good," Smokey said, wiping his eye with a rough knuckle. "You did better than any of us. You didn't just survive the empty. You tamed it." "I didn't tame it. Smokey," I just joined it. I became the part of it that remembers. We sat there in silence for a long time, two old soldiers at the edge of the world. At 4:44 a.m., when the shift ended, Smokey started his truck and drove back toward the dawn. I stayed. For the first time, I didn't revert when the clock struck. I didn't return to the garage or the ether. I lingered in the morning light, a faint shimmer on the horizon, a trick of the heat haze. I had crossed the final threshold. I was no longer bound by the 71 minutes. I was permanent. I was the ghost in the machine, and the machine was the Interstate itself. April 15th, 1992. That is the date on the official report regarding the disappearance of Patrolman David Gabbery's patrol car. Of course, the real David was still alive, a sergeant sitting at a desk in Rawlins, confused by the paperwork regarding a vehicle that had vanished from the impound lot 3 years prior. But in the deeper history of the highway, that was the date I finally let go of the last anchor. I drove west, past Rock Springs, past the Utah border, following the vein of the empty all the way to the salt flats. The car dissolved around me, shedding its physical form. The tires became the hum of the road. The lights became the glitter of the stars. The siren became the whistle of the wind through the canyon. I am not a person anymore. I don't have a face to look at in the mirror. I don't have a name that I speak aloud. But I am still here. If you drive Interstate 80 today, you might feel me. It happens late at night, when you are fighting sleep, when the white lines start to mesmerize you. You might see a pair of headlights in your rearview mirror, keeping a steady distance. They don't glare, they don't push, they just watch. You might feel a sudden sense of calm wash over you, a feeling that you are safe, that someone is looking out for you. That is me. I am the intuition that tells you to slow down before you hit the black ice. I am the sudden static on the radio that wakes you up just as you are drifting into the median. I am the inexplicable urge to pull over at a rest area just minutes before your tire blows out. The empty is still here. It always will be. It is a shadow cast by the light of human movement. The mimics are still out there, too. The hungry things, the echoes, the traps. They evolve just as the cars do. They look like modern SUVs now, or sleek electric vehicles silent as death. They still try to lure the unwary. But they fear me. They know the signature of Unit 7. They know that the ghost trooper does not negotiate. When I appear, they scatter, fading back into the deep desert. I have seen generations of drivers come and go. I have seen the sons and daughters of the truckers I knew take the wheel. I have watched the world speed up, become more connected, more noisy. But the silence of the third shift remains the same. It is the one constant. Sometimes, on very clear nights, I see the others. I see the faint outline of Rabbit's truck, still missing its trailer, driving alongside me for a few miles. I see the shimmer of Mark Patterson's car, still patrolling his own loop of madness, though he keeps his distance now. We are the Night Watch. We are the legends of the asphalt. To the drivers listening to this, to anyone who finds themselves on that lonely stretch of Wyoming highway between 3:33 and 4:44 a.m., do not be afraid of the dark, but respect it. Keep your eyes on the road. If you see something that doesn't look right, a car with too many doors, a deer with too many legs, a star that moves against the rotation of the earth, do not stop. Do not engage. Just drive. And if you see a patrol car parked on the shoulder, its lights pulsing with a gentle, golden rhythm, give a nod as you pass. You don't need to wave. You don't need to slow down. Just know that you are not alone. I am there. I am always there. My name was David Gabbery. I was a traveler who found his destination. I asked for silence, and I was given a symphony of stars. I asked for emptiness, and I was filled with a purpose that will outlast the pavement itself. The third shift never ends, but neither does the helping. Drive safe. The road is long, but the guardian is always watching.